I'm speaking as someone who prepares teacher librarians, which is a pretty marginal area in the area of teacher preparation. So just to give you a little bit of my context, I teach at Pratt Institute. Pratt is not a school of education. It's primarily a school of art and design and architecture. So there are two education programs, one that prepares art teachers and one that prepares school librarians. I will be graduating 4 students this spring who I suspect comprise the unofficial paid pilot of edTPA for school librarians in New York State. My colleagues and I, we call ourselves the other 7 sisters because we are the 7 library schools of New York State, and we all happen to be women who run the school library programs. We cannot find evidence of a pilot having been done on school library candidates in New York State. We are still trying to get information about this from the state, and it's not going so great. So, word association, what do you think when you think of a school librarian? Just 1 second. Any of these things? Windows, some person sitting at a desk who's just kind of like, or someone with a bun stamping books. She's super nice. This is what I'm up against because my students, and I kind of threw this together, so these are the backs of their heads, but my students are dynamic. My students teach technology. My students teach literacy. My students are critical pedagogues. My students are not bun-wearing book stampers. New York City has a very low regard for school librarians. There are 333 school librarians employed in 1,700 schools, some of them serving multiple campuses. And so we are out of compliance with the New York State rule that helps the state, this is sort of like a quick and dirty description, get money from Race to the Top because librarians are required. So in August 2013, New York City asked for a waiver so they wouldn't have to have school librarians, or they could provide equivalent services, which is weirdly condoned in state policy. So that's sort of the school library context, and I hope that I've sort of painted a picture of sort of where my students are at. And yet, my students want to be school librarians. They are passionate, and if I can just crow about my students, cooperating teachers call me, and they're mad at me if they don't get a student teacher. The DOE emails me and says, make sure you send us those resumes, even while your students are still working their way out of the tests, because they are beloved. My students, and it has nothing to do with me, it's their own awesomeness. So we're in a weird place. So AASL, the American Association of School Librarians, did a survey on the phone a couple of years ago, and they asked school librarians what they thought their roles were now versus what their roles were evolving into in the 21st century with as libraries become more dynamic information spaces rather than sort of curatorial spaces. So school librarians said now we're teachers, information specialists, instructional partners, and program administrators. But in the future, we'll be instructional partners, information specialists, teachers. You guys can read. What does edTPA test school librarians on? The teacher role. That's it. My students paid $300 to be tested on the 4th criteria of this list. And I should say this is not new. And I know that Beverly Falk said earlier that there are 3 other tests, and that's absolutely true. And for years I've been saying that the Pearson assessments of my students do not actually assess what they do. In fact, I have test prep at my school for the CST for school librarians, and I call it the School Library Princess Seminar, because what you do is you learn how to be the school librarian who's stamping books with a bird on her finger and like humming around the library, not the school librarian who's working at a school that has totally inadequate resources to support emerging readers who are much older than kindergarten. They are doing work, you get the idea, I don't need to go on and on. It doesn't test the reality of my students' lives, and I would like to argue that the edTPA also does not test the reality of my students' workplace. These assessments may have been written by teachers, but I don't think they were written by librarians. So, but yet librarians are still teachers, and one of the things, and edTPA has done some really good things for me. I, as someone with a degree in education, was brought to this program to teach these school librarians, who most of their curriculum is very library science focused, how to teach. So we've gotten deeper into unit planning. edTPA sort of gave me a reason to say, let's do really deep, rich unit planning as opposed to the sort of one-off kind of instruction that libraries often do as a result of scheduling limitations and this kind of thing. The sequencing of these lessons, connecting them to standards, this is all stuff that the American Association of School Librarians has been trying to get library schools to do, and in some ways edTPA sort of helped me have these conversations with my students. And it really, a lot of the intensity of this has had my students thinking a lot about their teacher identity as part of their librarianship, but unfortunately it also has them really questioning it. And I'm not going to reiterate the excellent points made by the two teacher candidates here, but it's heavy on our hearts. Librarians, if you remember one thing about my presentation today, please remember that librarians are collaborators. And my students are collaborators. They always work with teachers. All of their work is done in support of teachers. So it's a little bizarre that the edTPA lessons that my students have to turn in, the teachers cannot be present. I had a student taping in a school, and the teacher said something to the students, and we were all just like, no, because we had to throw out that lesson because the teacher's voice couldn't be on the video. So that was a big bummer. But having said that, in the spirit of school librarian collaboration, I have been collaborating a lot with the other library and iSchools or information schools, which has been a wonderful experience. And talk about a community of practice. edTPA has taught us that we really are one. And for me, at a small school where we don't have a proper school of education, it's just these two programs kind of cobbling all this stuff together, the generosity of my colleagues at Teachers College, NYU, and these other iSchools, I wouldn't be able to be here speaking to you all without that. So if there's one thing I feel like edTPA has done that's positive, it's really made this community come together and talk. And not just about edTPA, but a lot of other things. So I thank you guys very much. Challenges for students, 0 points for collaboration on edTPA, and yet the whole gestalt of school librarianship is around collaboration. So that's problematic. As everyone said, it's placed limitations on our placements. The quest for artifacts in the school library is really problematic because all the work that we do is in support of classroom projects. So it's been very weird to think about how to get these assessments that we can hand in for edTPA because a lot of them don't feel authentic. Because my students contribute to one piece of a larger whole of the academic work that their students are doing in classrooms. So now we're making up these like worksheets and things that in the past might have had a more natural connection to a research project or a big classroom study. So that's been a little odd. And as I mentioned before, I think my students are pioneering the exam. We can't find any evidence of school library folks who have taken this in New York State during a pilot. And just a lot of the materials that I'm using to figure out how to scaffold this for my students are coming out of ELA and related areas, but not specifically school library. I also wonder if edTPA is a form of educational research. It's been there. I've had a lot of hard conversations with my teacher candidates and their cooperating teachers about the importance of informed consent. As a parent myself, in my community of parents, a lot of my friends don't realize what's going on with edTPA, and they get these consent forms and they ask me questions about them, and that's a hard conversation to have with my other hat on, because it's very hard to take this one off completely. And then, no library PowerPoint is complete without a cat. So I feel like edTPA has kind of turned me into middle management. Like I am the person who is saying, my students, when edTPA feels very heavy on their hearts and they have, anxiety or they need to cry, like I'm the person who has to say, I'm sorry, I know it stinks, but you really have to do this. I'm meeting this out, and I hate being the cat with the tie on. But that's who I am. And I don't even like cats. But edTPA, it's really counter to the collaborate ethos of school libraries, which has made it difficult. Sometimes I feel that edTPA makes it difficult for me as a teacher educator to sort of access the intrinsic goods of teaching myself. And I, as you've heard, it's clearly doing that from the students too. There's a wonderful literature, a very thoughtful literature. It's also a little sad on demoralization in teaching. Dora Santoro, if you're looking for a citation. That's really been meaningful to me at this moment when I'm finding it difficult. And I can't help but wonder if edTPA in some way is in a high-stakes assessment for me as an untenured, quote-unquote, young faculty member, who is edTPA going to be something that's going to make it difficult for me to get tenure? Are the test scores of my students going to be something that are used to levy my worth? And that's my most paranoid thought that I'm sharing with you. So I don't know. And do I have? I'm okay. Okay. edTPA in some ways was drawing on things that we were already doing, the reflective practice, but it's presented also challenges. So I hope I gave a nuanced portrait of that, and not sort of a dichotomized one, because I think that's been a problem with the discourse in general. But thanks, everyone. School libraries, yay. Yeah.